why do some people appear as ghosts and other people don't? Well, there could be a number of reasons for this, but the principal reason seems to me is that some people find it very difficult to make the transition from the physical to the astral world. And there can be a number of reasons for this. Death might come very suddenly, or it might come unexpectedly to the point where people don't realize immediately that they've died, and only when they can't interact with other people do they realize it. It could also be that they are still very attached to a place on earth, or to another person, or to a cause, or to money, or to something, and they find it very difficult to relinquish that. And it is said that some of these individuals, if we call them that, can hang around for a very, very long time. And this is why you get cases of haunted houses and castles and historical places.
Welcome, everyone, to That Death Show. We have made it to episode 2. I'm here with my co-host, Tim Wyatt. I'm Ann Kelly. Tim, how are you?
I'm very well, Ann. How are you?
Oh, my God. Well, I tell you what, learning the new technology of the podcast world is very different from days in radio. I used to have my program directors would always tell me, do not tell the audience of any drama backstage. So therefore, I'm not going to tell the audience about the drama. I will just say that it has been a technological Shakespeare festival. And so here we are, though we are learning and we are loving this. I love it. I'm so grateful to have you with me. This is a big episode right before Halloween. Thank you to all of you who are with us for the ride. Welcome to episode 2 of That Death Show, where our goal here is to eliminate or help eliminate the fear and the mystery that surrounds death. And tomorrow being Halloween, today is the 30th of October, sometimes known as Devil's Night or Mischief Night. So perhaps that's why we have so many technical gremlins. I'm not sure. But in this episode, we're going to be covering esoteric science's explanation of what happens when the physical body dies and where we go. Now, also, we know that there are ghosts. We know by now, throughout history, we know that there are things beyond the physical world. We know about hauntings and poltergeists and specters and shadow people and all that, but I don't think you can find a show that actually goes beyond just sharing the experience of a near-death experience or of a scary story, or some of the YouTube channels like Slapped Ham and Goose Pimples. They've got some great footage of these specters and spirits, but what show tells you what you're looking at, or how they get there, or why they happen? We're going to do that today on That Death Show. We're going to go beyond religion and science. We're going to go deep into the paranormal of our everyday lives, into telekinesis, psychic powers, clairvoyance, and all of that. But first, before we get started, let us set the scene. Tim, I want to know, what does the perennial philosophy say about what happens when the physical body dies, please?
Okay, Anne. Well, the ancient wisdom tradition from which these ideas are drawn and which appear loosely in science, philosophy, and religion, usually in a very distorted form, tell us that when the physical body dies, when we stop breathing, or the heart stops, or the blood stops pumping, however you define it, then there is still an active part of us which remains. And this is an energizing principle which all human beings and animals have as well. And it's known as the energy body, sometimes called the etheric body. And it's basically, it uses vital energies from the universe, prana, chi in Chinese, and it circulates them around the body. And this body also dies within 24, 36, 48 hours after death. But at the moment we die, and all traditions speak about this in slightly different ways, we have some kind of life review. Now, we've all done things in our lives that we're not necessarily too proud of. And if we've lived 70 or 80 years, we've done maybe a lot of things that we're not proud of, but we have to face these things again. So we have this life review in which all the events of our lives, perhaps starting with the most recent first and going back as far as we can, unfold. But interestingly, we don't just watch these as an observer. It isn't just some kind of slideshow. It shows us the effect that our words and actions and even thoughts have had on other people. So that's the main thing that happens. But how someone dies, the circumstances in which they die, is very, very important for their onward journey. So if someone dies peacefully of old age, and most people die in medical settings these days, that's one thing. If you're killed violently in a war or a so-called accident or murder, it's rather different.
Well, we touched on that last week about the life flashing before our eyes. That saying has a foundation somewhere. And what you mentioned right there, which is the law of karma and equilibrium, this life review is seeing, you do get to see the good that you did as well, and how your actions and your thoughts, from what I understand, affected those from their point of view. But really quick, in what I have been studying and understand, that you will see it in the review, but you will also experience it in a life, in a physical body, in the receiving end. Is that the case too? Can you expand on that as well?
Well, yes, indeed. And also sometimes people have some or all of these experiences in miniature. When they have near-death experiences, sometimes then a life review of some kind is actually involved in it. But this is very important after this first death. And in fact, as we all see, there's not just one death, but up to 3 deaths involved in it. Because once we die, there is another part of us, which we call the astral body, which goes to its home in the astral world. Now, perhaps we should just explain a little bit about what this is. I don't know how familiar people will be with what it is. So shall I go ahead and perhaps just outline what it's like there?
Well, absolutely. I wanted to clarify here really quick on the laws of karma and equilibrium. As we are having to, as we sow, so shall ye reap. What a perfect peacekeeper that would be if we would only get our heads around that everything that we do has an equal and opposite reaction that we will experience the effects of. That is a very powerful thing to take with us here. And that's part of the perennial philosophy. Absolutely. I would love to move into the astral realm. Many people have ideas of what this might be, where these Akashic records or where these ghosts come from. Please, yes, tell us about the astral plane.
Well, there's been a lot of interest in the astral plane in recent decades as people have become much more familiar with Eastern philosophies from which it's derived, notably Buddhism and Hinduism, which enshrine the law of karma, the law of cause and effect, as a central part of their spiritual beliefs. And the idea is very simple, that everything we do or say or think or feel sends out vibrations into the world, into the universe. And eventually, whether they're good vibrations or bad vibrations or indifferent ones, they produce effects. Nothing in the world happens by accident or luck or chance or anything like that. It's all based on previous events. So in one sense, everything we do in one life is setting the scene for a future life or future lives. And karma is a very, very important principle in order to create a sense of equilibrium, a sense of balance, because clearly a lot of the actions that we undertake as human beings do create imbalance of some kind, and that harmony needs to be restored.
But Tim, a lot of people, we have a hard time with responsibility, meaning I can't possibly be responsible for all this crap that's happening to me now. It's not my fault. I'm a victim. It's all their fault. Isn't that a common way that we look at things? And we think that it's just bad luck. Surely.
It's a very common way for people to look at things. And obviously in the modern world, people sometimes choose the option of victimhood instead, which is a very ugly state to be in. But clearly we are all responsible for the things that happen to us and anybody else. And in one sense, to treat yourself as a victim is to negate your own spiritual principles, because you have got here through your own efforts and actions and all the rest of it. No one else has put you here. There's no such thing as providence or chance or luck or destiny or anything like that. It's all a result of causes which we have set in motion ourselves, either individually or collectively, because karma works not just for individuals, but it works collectively too.
And again, it isn't retribution, it isn't punishment, and it isn't personal. It is simply balance, correct? The ultimate law.
Yes, it's absolutely dispassionate, although inevitably people will take it personally. People will see it as reward, and more often than not as reward, because people don't count their blessings, but people will see it as punishment. Why is this happening to me? Why is this terrible situation unfolding? I have done nothing to deserve this. And indeed, in this life, they may indeed have done nothing to deserve it. But who knows about previous lives? And herein lies the problem. Most of us are completely unaware of our previous incarnations on the earth.
We spoke about that in the last episode. You said reincarnation is making a comeback. More and more people are understanding that there's more to our story. And everything, there's a record kept of every action, every deed, every thought, everything. They say that is on the astral plane, the Akashic records. Please expand, if you can, on this astral plane, which is apparently close to our physical world.
Yes, it's almost, although it's a non-physical plane, it is a mirror of the physical world. Everything in the physical world has its astral counterpart. But to make it slightly complicated, it's also a subjective world, which is ruled by desire and by emotion. Therefore, what we expect is probably what we'll get. Once we die, if we expect nothing to happen, then probably for a while nothing will happen. If we expect to meet devils prodding us into flames, then indeed we might do that. If we expect to meet Jesus or angels or some other religious figure or old Uncle Bob who passed on 10 years ago, we might well do that as well. So the astral world is a mirror image, but it's a subjective world. And it's also, the reason it's called the astral world, as we explained last week, is it comes from the Latin word astrum for star, because it has a star-like, water-like quality to it.
Do we go there in our dreams?
Yes. Yes, we go there every night. Obviously, we don't always remember our dreams. But clearly, this is a place that we visit regularly without knowing it. There are people who are able to astral travel after various forms of spiritual discipline and meditation and other such things. But most people find it very difficult to do. There is some evidence that the astral world may be opened up by some psychedelic drugs, notably one called dimethyltryptamine, and they have done a number of experiments with this, and they found, amongst other things, that DMT enhances people's telepathic abilities. And clearly, in the astral world, you know, we don't have voices, we don't have larynxes and everything. So therefore, communication is going to be of this particular nature.
The Akashic records, they say, are stored on the astral plane and that they are a reflection. And I still try to get my head around that. I'm always learning. I have more questions than answers. What do you know of the Akashic records? Can anyone access them? What are they and where are they?
Well, they are said to be stored in a particular part of the astral plane. They are said to be a complete and an indelible record of everything that mankind has ever done, everything that every individual has said or thought or done. You can imagine, even with our data harvesting and storage abilities these days, it comes, you know, you wonder how many terabytes are, you know, in the Akashic records. But this is said to be this record, which has gone on since time immemorial. And yes, it can be accessed, but not by everybody. You need to have the right means of doing that. And there are people with clairvoyant abilities who can do this. And also in the modern world, it's not necessarily that different from remote viewing, which many people might have heard of, which is where people imagine themselves in an office in the Kremlin, breaking into the safe and stealing all Russia's secrets or whatever. So this information is available, but not everybody can access it. because clearly that information is very powerful. But once we can access this stuff, we can find out accurately what did go on in the past. But this is something, I'm afraid, which is at this stage reserved for the very few, and I'm not amongst those few.
I understand. So we do pass through the astral world. We have the past life review. You mentioned the experience of those who pass through the astral world, the thoughts that are there, the energies that are there, the entities that are there. We also touched on barely that thoughts become living things. The thoughts, and we talked about that's how we fell in love with you, was your episode on elementals and fairies and nature spirits, talking about how earthly beings feed on thought, and also astral in the world beyond this world, that thoughts become far more than just a passing blip, that they become living beings. Is it possible for you to expound on that for us today?
Yeah, one of the things that people often say, one of the spiritual cliches which emerges from time to time is thoughts are things. You know, they're not physical objects, but they are real things. And thought forms which are created deliberately, you know, for example, in a religious service somewhere, or indeed at the opposite end of the spectrum in a black magic ceremony. These thought forms can be extraordinarily powerful, and they can hang around for a very, very long time. In fact, some of them that were created many thousands of years ago may still be having an effect on the world today, many, many centuries later.
We need to do a full episode on the power of thought, of what they actually are and where they come from, because a lot of times we think we're just generating them. They came up with only us, but we have the universal consciousness. So are we, as the individual brains of humans and living beings, are we the receiver? Are we the sender? Which one are we? So I think we definitely need to cover more of that. As we're getting into this night before Halloween, so much is going on out there tonight as people prepare for the veil to get thin at this time of year. It's very, very exciting. Lots of things. I don't even know if paranormal activity picks up in the real world, but I know it does online and on television. And I do find it funny, Tim, when something happens paranormal to people, often I see on some of these things on YouTube, they will think that it automatically has to do with a message for them. So there's a paranormal event. Obviously, they're here to tell me something. So they'll have the communication equipment, or they might think it's a grandmother. A lot of times people make paranormal encounters personal, and they're not always personal, are they?
No, not at all. But you can see why people do this. And you can see why people are attracted to such things as spiritualism. And I'd just like to mention that, actually, because I think it might be an apposite moment to do it. Spiritualism arose, of course, in the mid 19th century in America after the Civil War, when 620,000 men had been killed, and women, widows, sisters, mothers all wanted to know what had happened to their sons and loved ones, and wanted to know if they could communicate with them. And spiritualism became very, very popular very, very quickly. But later, a certain number of people went into this more closely, and they found that what people are actually communicating with in the spiritualist seances is not the personality of the dead person, but only a fragment of that personality, because the astral plane, its purpose when we die, is as a purification center or refinery to get all the bad stuff out of us and to save the good stuff, which it stores up for use in future lives. So once that astral body has been hollowed out, it becomes known as a shell. Those shells are often occupied, just as they are in the sea, by other entities, some of which are very strange and not very bright nature spirits, which inhabit these shells of the degraded personality, and which can then, communicate apparently with people on this side. But the stuff they say is usually extremely banal. They don't say anything about what it's like where they are. Occasionally, they might offer the most basic insights. Uncle Tom died of heart disease or something like that. But rarely do they provide any insights. And therefore, a lot of people like Madame Blavatsky, and a lot of esotericists of her caliber have warned against the dangers of trying to communicate with the dead out of curiosity, because apart from anything else, it doesn't help the dead and can impede them on their onward journey.
Well, that is so important what you said about astral shells. I don't know if there's going to be many of our viewers or listeners that are familiar with that term. What Tim is talking about here is as we move on from the physical, there is something that is left behind. He mentioned, like in the sea, the astral shells left behind are inhabited by sometimes nature spirits, elementals, other astral plane beings that can almost wear that form, and with very basic information that most likely they are getting from those who are sitting requesting the information. Very rarely, like you said, do they talk about what it's like beyond the afterworld. They're talking about this particular world, like, oh, you're wearing pink socks tonight. Oh my God, how did they know that? Blah, blah, blah. Now that we know the astral shells, mostly what you see in mediumship, they are communicating with that. That does offer comfort. What about the Ouija board? What is it that moves the Ouija board, the spirit board?
Well, it's the same thing that moves any other predictive system. The I Ching or the tarot cards or the Ouija board or, casting pig entrails, it's all the same process. It's just, the Ouija board just becomes the focus for more invisible forces and influences. It's just a focus. The Ouija board itself is of no importance, but I do believe that communications can work in this particular way. And I do think that there are certain systems, perhaps not the Ouija board, but certainly I Ching. And I've been throwing the I Ching for 50 years, and it does have very strong predictive capabilities once you know how to use it and once you know how to interpret it.
Do you find that it is accurate? If you've been using it for 50 years, the I Ching, it's a series of coins, correct? And you throw asking one question, and that's a yes or no, or how does it work?
Well, you throw typically 6 coins, although originally it was 64 yarrow stalks, whatever they might be, the Chinese system. But basically, you throw 3 coins and produce 6 lines, which are called a hexagram, an upper part and a lower part. And then they form one of 64 different hexagrams, which each is an idea and each of which has a name and which produces a different set of circumstances and energies and conditions. But obviously, it is usually quite general, but occasionally it gives you individual lines to read, which sometimes are amazingly appropriate to particular situations in your life. Like, for example, it says, go to the south as opposed to the north. And that means, be adventurous, start a new venture. Whereas if it's the north, no, just stay with things as they are, because any venture will not be fortuitous at this particular time. So that is a system which I've used a lot.
Have you asked them about our podcast?
I haven't asked it about it so far, but maybe I should. I won't do it right.
Yes, I think you should.
Yeah.
I love that. Do you feel, though, when people say that, before we get into the ghost, about the Ouija board or any kind of divination, from you have the little pendulums, there's all kinds of, or the rods, people will associate the Ouija board with evil. I think it got a bad rap because of The Exorcist. Is it necessarily darker spirits or those who are, just not of pure light for these divination things?
Well, the church continues, even though it's in decline, to have a huge influence on these things. And you're absolutely right. It is the church which has named these things as tools of the devil. Indeed, the Greek Orthodox Church condemns meditation as black magic, believe it or not. So it doesn't take much to get the ecclesiastical authorities into a bit of a twist over this one. And they will use anything. I mean, they condemned the nature spirits in the Middle Ages as the workers of the devil, rather than as valuable helpers to humankind.
Which leads me to one of the biggest questions that I have, and you're probably one of the only people on the planet that would understand why this baffles me so, is why, When they suspect that there is a demonic haunting, do they bring in the church to clear that? Wouldn't that be a little, what's the word, ironic or unhelpful? Do you see what I'm saying there?
Well, the Catholic Church, and I believe also the Church of England, does employ exorcists. And certainly the Catholic Church does have a number of these people who go around and exorcise places or people. I have seen an exorcism myself in a church in Romania, and there was this woman screaming and shouting on the floor, and it was like, her head was practically swiveling around this, and it was like some sort of cheap Hollywood horror movie. So these things, I mean, you see it in Baptist churches, don't you, in Southern America, where people go into all sorts of strange hysterical states and everything. And therefore, when you look at all these things, and you can see that the church doesn't do anything really to dispel this hysteria because it can use it.
Well, my point there was, and I don't want to piss anybody off, but I do know that there is much corruption in the church, and there's a lot of darkness, spiritual darkness in high places, let's say, which I find I don't understand why other people aren't, confused at, you've got what they call a demonic haunting, and then they bring the church in, which has quite a bit of corruption. And I'm just going to say it like that. That's something that I've always been baffled by. I don't understand. Perhaps, I don't know. As far as America seems to be more big on this, that a haunting, they equate it to, it is the devil. And since it is Devil's Night, Tim, I wanted to ask you, and I know we could do a whole thing on this, but what are your thoughts on the, meaning a one single entity, devil?
Well, the devil is purely a human concoction cooked up by the church to frighten people and control people. And the devil was ubiquitous in the Middle Ages, which is why so many millions of people, many of them women, were burnt at the stake or tortured or had their lives ruined in one form or another. It was all the work of the devil. He was a very convenient character to create, to put all the sins of mankind upon, and anybody who brushed even closely to him was contaminated and had to be exterminated. This was a very powerful means of control. The devil, people have talked about in many religious traditions of there being, a good God and a bad one, Ahura Mazda and Ahriman in Zoroastrianism, for example. But this idea of an evil being, a Satan or a devil or even a fallen angel like Lucifer or anything like that, these are not helpful. And just to concoct something like the devil can only be there for one purpose. And certainly there are no devils in the great beyond, as far as I know, apart from ourselves.
I was just going to say, it's something to blame. The devil made me do it. It's really you made you do it. It is your lower nature, your darker, lower self, your selfishness, your greed, your need to control, your wanting to be important, your lower self. And that's what we talk about, the triumph of good and evil and this great battle. It isn't a supernatural war in the skies being fought on your behalf. It's being fought within you. So you overcome your own darkness when you feel that anger and rage and selfishness and ignorance and judgment. That, to me, is where evil lies. And I think that the devil, as we call it Devil's Night tonight, we'd like to blame something outside of ourselves. Then, therefore, we're not responsible, right?
Well, also, I would say, although the devil doesn't exist, there are diabolical people. There are diabolical entities on both the outer planes and the inner planes who've been slugging it out for time immemorial. So there are bad people, but I just don't think there is particularly a devil. But yeah, this night, it's often called All Souls Night or the Day of the Dead. It's a time when the veneer between the physical world and the non-physical world, the veil begins to become more porous and we can see through. And many cultures celebrate this, not necessarily at this time of year, but the Mexicans have a Day of the Dead. And the one that we celebrate now is based on the Celtic tradition, of course.
And with all the people dressing up, we're getting right now to the meat and potatoes of this broadcast. Tim Wyatt, may I ask you, as we said we would explain the how, why, and what are ghosts? We've talked about the scary stories. You've seen plenty of them out there. What is it that we see? For example, when we see an entity taking shape, sparkling, obviously moving like a human, not quite solid, what is it that we're looking at?
Well, essentially, in the vast majority of cases where people see these things and try to photograph them, probably what they're seeing are energy imprints of some kind. As we said before, everything that we do leaves its imprint and its vibration on the world. However trivial we think it is, it still sends something out. And these energy patterns, which people see, are residual apparitions and energy imprints of dead people, no doubt. Now, why do some people appear as ghosts and other people don't? Well, there could be a number of reasons for this, but the principal reason seems to me is that some people find it very difficult to make the transition from the physical to the astral world. And there can be a number of reasons for this. Death might come very suddenly, or it might come unexpectedly to the point where people don't realize immediately that they've died. And only when they can't interact with other people do they realize it. It could also be that they are still very attached to a place on earth, or to another person, or to a cause, or to money, or to something. And they find it very difficult to relinquish that. And it is said that some of these individuals, if we call them that, can hang around for a very, very long time. And this is why you get cases of haunted houses and castles and historical places where there has probably been much brutality in the past. This may also play a factor. You know, if people have died quite difficult or agonizing deaths, then that itself sends out a vibration and can leave a residual imprint. However, there may be other phenomena at work here, one of which is my old favorites, the angels and nature spirits, because they may sometimes be mistaken for ghosts on the few occasions where people do see these things. And it does happen, but it's not that common. People might see these, particularly in conditions of low light or whatever. And then another option, another possibility, which we can't absolutely rule out, is that these are otherworldly entities of some kind, extraterrestrials, or indeed trans-dimensional beings, which is something which is talked about a lot here. I think the most common phenomenon, the most common cause of ghosts is these people who simply cannot move on and remain somehow anchored to the physical world, because the physical world and the lower levels of the astral plane are closely connected to each other.
So how much of them has moved on? Are they making a conscious decision because of unfinished business or what have you to hold on to the physical? Is a part of them in the astral and they have refused to let go? And when they say go into the light, and apparently some of them do, does that mean to let go and then they're able to move on? Is it their willingness to stay? Or I have heard also in our teachings that the wailing and gnashing of teeth and the grieving often binds those who have left or trying to leave here to the physical. Can you explain some on that?
Yes, indeed. I mean, this is how we die is very important, and most people die in a medical setting. But if we have grieving relatives round the bed, screaming and shouting and wailing, that is not going to help us, because you need a time of peace and tranquility, because you are making that most important transition. So therefore, the conditions in which you die, if you see these people all grieving over your passing, that might make you very reluctant to move on. It might keep you anchored there. I have found and read and studied this and have found that sometimes these spirits need permission to move on. I saw this happen once, I think as I explained in our last podcast at Leeds Lodge, where we had a particular cold spot, and somebody came along, did a few things, and this thing was gone. So that is, in one sense, what an exorcism is all about. It's not just getting some horrible entity out of someone, it's sending a spirit on its way.
This horrible entity or this darkness or this angry spirit, sometimes there's noises, there's smells, sometimes there's temperature dropping, there's things that go along with it. A lot of times, especially in America, I do notice or other cultures as well, I don't want to just say it's America, but we'll automatically go to it is a demon. And I just can't say that that's what I personally believe, but it doesn't really matter what I personally believe. I just would like to be able to get what esoteric science explains, what these are, and can they hurt you? There has been some footage of these entities. They will show up on the screen because everybody has a phone in their pocket and they're recording all this stuff that actually can touch or play and pull hair, or they can pull you under the bed a little bit, and they can actually interact with you. What is that? Is this the astral realm that we're looking at?
Well, it could be. But when we look at things like poltergeist activity, for example, and this is quite common, especially with younger people sometimes, teenagers, it happens in their homes often, where furniture is strewn around and that sort of thing. Clearly, a physical force is involved here. How something is translated from an astral force to a physical force is a mysterious and not entirely understood process, but clearly that is possible. As for people being attacked and injured, I know that this goes on, but I suspect, given the amount of activity that goes on, I think it is a comparatively rare phenomenon. I don't think it's something that happens all the time. But obviously, as soon as you start talking about spirits and ghouls and ghosts and all that sort of stuff, the fear factor immediately flips in, doesn't it? Because people have been conditioned to be frightened of these things, just the way that we've been conditioned to be wary of extraterrestrials if they exist. We call them aliens and not space brothers, for example.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. That's the first time I've ever heard that said. Space Brothers is a much better name. And I must say that anything paranormal, to me, I find it extremely comforting, even the dark ones, because it reminds me there's something far beyond just the physical world. I find it, I don't know, absolutely. It calms, it reassures. What do you think about that? Have you been attracted to ghost stories and, I don't know what, horror movies?
Well, I think everyone is, aren't they? I remember when I was 5 years old, we used to go on holiday to a place called Clacton-on-Sea in Essex because my auntie and uncle had a boarding house there, so it was a nice cheap holiday for us. And the very first thing I always wanted to do when we went on the pier was to go on the ghost train. And then the next thing I wanted to do was to go on the ghost train again, and after about the third one, my father was getting a bit impatient with all this because he wanted to paddle in the sea. So people, I think, are brought up culturally to look on ghosts. Particularly since, the 19th century, and all these various writers who've written about all this stuff. It's a very, very popular genre, both in films, in books, and all the rest of it. And clearly, people do like to be frightened. But the problem there is that because they become frightened, they can't see these things in any kind of objective way. And one of the things that occult science does, it doesn't look on these things as being supernatural or anything like that. It puts them in the context where they're meant to be. And many of these entities are from the astral plane that we're talking about, or have a presence on the astral plane. They're certainly not physical entities walking about. Another thing that we might talk about, and this is something that's quite interesting and it's debated a lot, is, some people say there are a lot of soulless people in the world. Not just that, but people who don't have any, everybody's got a soul. So it's not like, I don't mean soulless in the fact that it's like a missing part that wasn't installed in the factory or anything like that. I don't mean it from that point of view, but someone who has absolutely no connection with their souls, that they're entirely disconnected from any higher aspects of themselves, no notions of spirituality or soul, no awe or wonder or anything like that. It's just a mechanical world, and what you see is what you get, and then you die, and that's it. And, this very bleak view is all conditioned to some extent by the fear. And human beings always fear the unknown, don't they? That's one of the key features of human beings. But the fear factor, conflated with all the ghosts, has made any proper study of them absolutely, well, faced with numerous difficulties, because often when you watch these programs and the people are investigating and they keep shrieking, "Oh, I saw something in the corner," and doing all this, and it just becomes a form of, I'm not decrying what they do, but it's a cheap form of entertainment, isn't it? And you just wonder how much of this stuff is authentic. I'm sure some of it is, and some of it is probably whipped up for the cameras, but I don't know. But we need to get, as with death, we need to separate ourselves off from the fear of these entities that we don't really understand, but we immediately condemn them as being hostile and a threat to us, don't we?
I think that's our ignorance. We are quite ignorant to do so. And it is, as you mentioned, the fear. People like to have the thrill of the fear while they're in a safe environment, like reading a scary book or being in a scary movie. I find great comfort even in the horrific ones, because then I know that there's something far beyond the physical world. I think that it is extremely entertaining. People are drawn to it. And when they're drawn to it, they're drawn to the esoteric science. I think they are wide open to be able to find out the how, the what, the why, and the when and where of all of these things. That ghosts are not just supernatural, they are natural, superly. So they are supernatural. It's normal, super normal to be understanding that there's spirit energies, there's memories that play back. I think I asked you before about the movie The Stone Tapes, which was early 70s, where the premise of the movie was, in this ancient mansion, the stones had quartz within that could record things like, I don't know if it was the Roman soldiers walking by, or a repeated action of a ghost walking down a white lady or something like that, like a tape recorder. So sometimes the same things take place again. And I don't know, are things like that, repeated actions like the Roman soldiers walking in those same steps once again, are they conscious, or is this a recording? Could this be something like the stone tapes suggested? What are your thoughts?
Well, there is much evidence to suggest that many monuments around the world, and if you look at many of these monuments, they're constructed of granite, which is a very hard material, or other stones which contain quartz crystal. It's known that quartz crystal is a good storage of memory. In fact, they're using it in new computers these days. Therefore, it's suspected that some of these monuments, like the pyramids, like others, Machu Picchu and various other places, might have information actually encoded within those particular stones. And I have no difficulty with that whatsoever. We just think these people were cavemen who somehow managed to erect 1,000-ton stones. Oh, how did they do that? Oh, they did it on rollers and everything. Yeah, 1,000. Oh, yeah. And you moved it 70 miles. Yeah, no problem at all. So we don't know how these things were built. We don't know what their function was, but we do know that one similarity is the fact that a lot of these stones have got quartz in them, or other crystals which are able to store memory.
Well, there's so much we can cover here on That Death Show, where we say the esoteric meaning of everything, consciousness, and eliminating the fear of death. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's very natural. We want to demystify, as Tim says, demystify death. But Tim, I need to let you know, as I have spent many, many hours with your image as we are recording these, do you know that you have orbs coming through you, around you, circling about around the back? I might even try to put one up here. Are you familiar with those? I think I told you about them in the past. Have others told you about them?
Yes, they have. You told me about them. And yesterday, when I was just testing out the camera, at the other side of this table where I'm now sitting, I saw, it was quite bright sunlight, and I saw a number of them floating around, and they were coming every 10 or 12 seconds. So yes, I am aware of them.
We don't know what orbs are, but we do know that they do get confused with dust particles, but you can actually tell because they have like a membrane. We can do a whole episode on that and talk about what we know. All we're sharing is what the ancient, ageless teachings have taught about all of these things, especially the transition of death and what we are, why we're here, and the meaning of life. So we have come to the end of this. We wish you a very happy and safe and sane Halloween. Next week, Tim and I will be back here on that death show to help eliminate the fear of death, talking about, we actually had a comment on YouTube before we even launched from a viewer named Yeshua Maitreya, who wanted to know about, everybody talks about near death and past life, but who talks about pre-birth life? And so Tim has set up for our next week, we're going to be talking about how we prepare our next incarnation and what we do between physical lives. So hopefully we were able to answer some of your questions. If we have not, please, please, please like and subscribe over on YouTube. But if you can, rate and review on the other platforms. We are working through some audio dramas that very well may be demonic, but we'll get there. We are getting there. And it has been a pleasure as always, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, esoteric author Tim Wyatt. He is the author of the Everyone's Book of the Dead, which we will be giving away some of these copies here on this show, and also the Myth of Death that you hear us talk about through these episodes. There will be links so you can watch that absolutely free. The most comforting film I have ever seen about death is The Myth of Death, and there's so much more where that came from. Thank you very much, Tim. Are you dressing up tomorrow?
Probably not. No, I have some business to attend to tomorrow, which doesn't involve ghouls and ghosties and that sort of thing. Something much more of this world.
I understand, but I look forward to our time together. We're here every Wednesday. And again, that death show, we call it the esoteric meaning of everything, but we're students. We don't have all the answers. We're just sharing with you what these ageless teachings teach us and explain about the unexplained, and especially about death, because not many people, I think people are still, I don't want to die, or it's not going to happen to me, but it is going to happen to all of us. And there's nothing to be afraid of. Any closing thoughts, Tim?
Well, just to say that it will be very interesting and next week to look at some of the things that we might get up to and the locations that we might go to in between lives. And there's one and possibly two locations that we'll be looking at in particular, and the mysteries of how we prepare for a new life and how we are born into that life.
One quick teaser. Do we pick our parents?
In most cases, we do, and that will come as a horrifying thought to a great many people.
Okay. Well, we can close. We're all here to learn. We're going to close on that. And all my love. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We will see you again next week on That Death Show. Thank you.
Now, people ask me why they should read my book, Everyone's Book of the Dead. Well, the Tibetans have one, the Egyptians have one, so why shouldn't everybody else? And this is panoramic compendium of death and dying, as well as the after-death states, karma and reincarnation throughout world history. So this book tells you everything you need to know about death, not just what happens when you die, but what happens on the inner planes afterwards. How long do we stay there? What does it look like? What might we be doing there? And how long is it before we eventually reincarnate in new bodies? Well, the answers are all here. Everyone's Book of the Dead, available from Firewheel Books.